between the patient and the doctor.
Dr. Paul, you're a practicing ophthalmologist. You're considering running for the United States Senate. What do you see happening to health care from the perspective of the practitioner should the president's program become law?
Well, I think the problem is going to be numbers of physicians, but we already see and have seen the exodus from Canada that you talked about earlier, where the Canadian physicians are coming to Kentucky. In fact, one Canadian physician is going to be hosting a fundraiser for me, and I said, well, you better do it soon because it looks like your system has followed you down to Kentucky. And so we are worried about it. We've tried some of these reforms before. We had health care reform in 1994 in Kentucky, and they legislated what policies you could sell. And we had 37 insurance companies, and 35 of them left the state, and we were left with 2 insurance companies because they told us if you were a 75-year-old widowed woman, you had to have pregnancy coverage, or right. Everyone had to have in vitro coverage, or everyone had to have this coverage. So the decisions...
Pre-diabetic coverage. You
exactly.
No indication of being pre-diabetic.
Exactly. And the decisions are no longer then the patient or the consumer of insurance, what you want to buy. The government tells you what you can buy, and the choices are limited. And that's also part of the health care plan that the House has been talking about. They talk about pages 16 through 19. The only policies that will be sold will be those that are approved by a committee. My father always says the more benign sounding the title of the bill, the more ominous the contents.
It probably is. Peter Schiff, Social Security broke, Medicare broke, Medicaid broke, the Post Office broke, Amtrak broke, the list goes on and on. What makes them think, after listening to Daniel Hannan talk about the British model, after listening to John Stossel talk about the Canadian model, that they could manage health care in this country with 300 million Americans?
Arrogance, hubris, I mean, you could come up with adjectives to try to define it. Maybe stupidity would be another one that would work. I mean, and it's not just these programs that are broke. The country's broke. They've bankrupted everybody pursuing these programs, and now, you know, we keep on doing it. I mean, we're going to do it until the whole country, the whole system comes crashing down around us, because the only reason they're getting away with it now is because the Japanese and the Chinese and the Saudis and everybody else is financing it. But that's going to come to an end. That's coming to an end soon. Look at the dollar again today, hitting a new low for the year. It's not long before the world's going to pull the plug on this.
Daniel Hannan, is there any semblance of a free market in Great Britain for health care whatsoever? And if so, to whom is it accessible?
Well, once you go down this road of having socialized health care, you tend to squeeze out the independent providers because, of course, the non-government provider can't compete on a fair level playing field with the one that's backed by the taxpayer. So what happened in Britain is that we introduced a national health system alongside what was at the time in the 1940s a vigorous private market, but private insurance became squeezed out to the very fringe. So fewer than 10% of the population can now afford private insurance because it's so expensive, because of course there isn't enough of a market there to have genuine competition and low prices. And basically what private insurance has become is a way for wealthy people to buy themselves a place at the front of the queue. So they go along wanting a hip operation. They're told by the NHS that it's going to be 12 months until they can be fitted in. So if they can afford it and they've got insurance, they go private, and they will often have the same procedure in the same institution with the same surgeon, but they can get it the following week because they've bought their way in, having already, by the way, paid with their taxes for the national health version. And, you know, I find it amazing, Judge, that I'm here in the US, here in the capital, having to talk about this to free people whose country was founded in the name and cause of low taxes and personal independence and national sovereignty. You know, I've been in Washington all day, and I've been replicating that scene in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where I've been going around sort of gawping at the memorials of all the people who are my political heroes. And I've been thinking back to what it was they stood for and what they wrote into the Constitution that still governs this nation. And it just, you know, what would they be thinking now to see, having made a revolution for the sake of taxes only being passed with popular consent, laws only being passed in a way that are accountable to the people, government being made answerable to everybody else, what would they now say if they could see this profusion of czars and massive executive power and bureaucracies already having taken over so much of the economy and the bailouts that you're now proposing to take over healthcare as well? You know, if you can hear a clanking noise, I tell you, it's the ghost of Jefferson rattling his chains.
They obviously would be disgusted. In fact, they probably would have immediately disarmed and stuck with the British system because I'm sure the British would have treated us much better as a colony. Look how good they did with Hong Kong. Right. I think we would be much more prosperous today had we remained a colony of Great Britain.
Well, I'll tell you a funny thing. It was probably the case. This may be a really unpopular thing to say, but it was probably the case that if you go back to the original Tea Party, a similar majority in Great Britain would have been sympathetic to the aims of the colonists as people in North America. Now, it's difficult to measure that because Britain wasn't a functioning parliamentary democracy at the time. We had a very restricted franchise, and of those who had the vote, there was a majority for coercion. But to the extent that you can measure it through things like newspaper circulation, petitions, it seems that the population of Britain was sympathetic to the aims of the American patriots in about the same proportion that the population of North America was, i.e. 2/3 to 3/4 of people were in favor of it.
Before I let you go, what are you doing in Washington?
Well, other than paying homage to the great patriot leaders, I'm writing a book about what's good about your system and why we should not copy, but I think of it as repatriate our revolution. Bring back the ideas that inspired your colonial leaders and re-import from your system the precepts and the political techniques that have kept the government small and the people free. Open primaries, dispersed jurisdiction, states' rights, low taxes, the election of public officials, the legislature controlling the executive, all of these things which were originally part of British political philosophy have sadly been lost in our country. And that's why I'm so desperately concerned when I see them under threat in your country. Because I look at America as a British patriot, I see British liberties thriving here in a way that they don't in the mother country, and I think if they go in America, then we really are doomed.
I've said this to you in person, and I'm happy to say it on national television. You will have a far better understanding of human freedom and of the American system of government than almost everybody that works within a quarter-mile radius of where you're now standing and draws a paycheck from the federal government. Daniel Hannan.
Maybe those two facts are connected.
Perhaps so. Thanks very much for joining us.
Plus, he can elocute it with an English accent, which makes it sound a lot smarter.
It does sound a lot better when it comes in your tone of voice than in one of ours. Daniel Hannan, thanks very much for joining us. Until the
Thanks again, Judge.
He just needs a white wig.
My only advice is he better start writing the book soon if they're going to try to take ideas from our country before we become completely like their country.
Well, I think he means the ideas that we used to have in this country, not the current ideas.
Another 6 months, though, and the book won't be any good to export it back.
Their system, as I understand it, the healthcare employees actually work for the government. They're government employers, so they're drawing a salary from the government. The government is not paying them a fee for service, it's paying them a salary.
And theirs is slightly different than Canada, where private practice is illegal in Canada. So there is private practice in England, but it's a two-tiered system. The wealthy can go to the front of the line, or the queue, as he likes to say.
Right.
But in England and in Canada, you don't have that choice at all. There's a great story, or not a great story, but a story going around the internet about the man with the kidney stones trying to get treatment in Canada. And a kidney stone, if you've ever had one or known someone who has one, is worse than having a baby. It's very, very significant pain. And he goes to the ER 15 times in 1 month. And they just shoot him up with narcotics, but they don't fix his problem. In our country, you'd be getting lithotripsy within a day or two,